If you fall asleep on a red-eye flight, check your watch the second you wake up. Because at 3:14 a.m., Flight 828 went completely dead silent. No engine roar, no air vents, just 30 rows of passengers who weren't breathing. And when I looked out the window, we weren't flying anymore. We were just hanging in the sky, and something was knocking on the glass. My name is David. I am an architectural consultant, and flying overnight is completely normal for me. I took the 11:30 p.m. red-eye from Los Angeles to Chicago. I remember the flight taking off smoothly. I remember the low, comforting hum of the Boeing 737 engine. I put my noise-canceling headphones on, leaned my head against the plastic wall, and closed my eyes. When I opened them, the world was wrong. The first thing that hit me wasn't what I saw, but what I didn't hear. Anyone who flies knows a cabin is never quiet. There is always the rush of air, the rattle of plastic tray tables, the low murmur of people talking. There was nothing. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, the kind of silence you only find deep underground. I pulled off my headphones. The silence didn't change. The main cabin lights were completely dead. The only illumination came from the emergency strip lighting on the floor, casting a sickening crimson glow across the seats. The air felt heavy, stagnant, and incredibly cold. My breath formed a faint white mist in front of my face. I turned to the man sitting next to me in 14B. He was a businessman in a gray suit. He was leaning back, his mouth slightly open. "Hey," I whispered. My voice sounded tiny, swallowed instantly by the dead air. "Hey man, wake up. I think the power went out." He didn't move. I reached out and pressed my fingers against his shoulder. Through his jacket, his body felt like solid wood, unyielding, cold. I looked closer at his chest. It wasn't moving. No rising, no falling. I put my hand right under his nose. There was no air coming out. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my stomach. I stood up, gripping the headrest of the seat in front of me. I looked down the aisle. Row after row. Dozens of passengers. Some were teenagers with hoodies pulled up. Some were elderly couples holding hands. Some were children holding stuffed animals. All of them were frozen. None of them were breathing. I unbuckled my seatbelt entirely and stepped into the aisle. My shoes sticking to the floor carpet made a loud, tearing sound that echoed through the empty cabin. "Is anyone awake?" I shouted. No response. Just 30 rows of open, unblinking eyes staring at the backs of the seats in front of them. I stumbled down the aisle, desperate to find a flight attendant. I reached the front galley. The curtain was pulled back. 2 flight attendants were standing by the food carts. I felt a massive wave of relief until I saw their faces. They were standing perfectly upright, staring straight ahead into the metal wall. Their eyes were wide open, their skin a pale, bruised blue color. They looked like mannequins left behind in an abandoned department store. The cockpit. The pilots had to be awake. They had to be communicating with air traffic control. I grabbed the heavy handle of the reinforced cockpit door and slammed my weight against it. In modern aviation, these doors are locked electronically from the inside with heavy deadbolts. It shouldn't have moved. Instead, with a long, rusty creak, the door slowly swung inward. The cockpit was freezing. Thick white frost webbed across the glass instruments. I looked at the pilot and co-pilot seats. They were empty. Not just empty, the clothes were there. The pilot uniforms were neatly draped over the seats, completely intact, hats resting on the headrests. But there were no human bodies inside them. The flight controls, the yokes, the throttles were completely melted into twisted, blackened shapes of plastic and metal, as if exposed to a localized, intense blast of heat. I backed away from the cockpit, my mind breaking. If there were no pilots and the controls were destroyed, then how were we still flying? I rushed to a window in row 4. I rubbed the condensation off the plastic and pressed my face against the glass, looking for the city lights of America below. There was nothing. No ground, no stars, no clouds. Just an absolute suffocating blackness. And then I realized something worse. The plane wasn't moving. When you fly, even in thick clouds, you can feel the vibration of speed. You can feel the slight tilts and shifts of aerodynamic drag. But this plane was perfectly unnaturally level. We weren't gliding. We weren't falling. We were suspended, placed into a void by something that didn't understand physics. Thud. A heavy metallic vibration shook the side of the aircraft. It came from the roof. Thud, thud. Something was walking on top of the airplane. Heavy, deliberate footsteps were moving along the metal roof right above my head. The metal was groaning under immense weight, flexing downward into the cabin. I scrambled backward into the aisle, falling onto my hands and knees. The footsteps stopped right above the center of the cabin. Suddenly, the overhead intercom speakers burst to life. Static roared through the cabin so loud it made my ears bleed. Then, the static cleared. A voice filled the room. It didn't sound human. It sounded like dozens of different voices, men, women, children, all speaking the exact same words at the exact same millisecond, perfectly synchronized. "Thank you for flying," the intercom droned. "We have reached our final destination." As the voice spoke, all 30 rows of frozen, comatose passengers did something that froze my blood. Simultaneously, with a series of sickening, synchronized, bone-cracking sounds, their heads tilted straight up toward the ceiling. Their dead eyes stared at the roof panels. Then the emergency red lights turned off completely. Total darkness. The sound of 30 window panes shattering inward filled the air. If you ever take a red-eye flight, keep your eyes open, because some flights don't land on Earth.